Let's learn more about Chemical Insight's research into 3D printer emissions and their human health impacts. During the initial research phase, Chemical Insights developed a methodology to identify and quantify emissions from 3D printers and evaluate the hazards of air emissions. Research goals included characterizing and quantifying particle and chemical emissions from 3D printers, establishing a testing method to measure particles and VOCs generated from 3D printers, evaluating emissions from 3D printers for human health impact, conducting toxicity studies of particles from 3D printers, and developing a consensus standard for a test method and emissions criteria for 3D printers. To achieve these goals, the following steps were taken. 1. Obtain different 3D printers and filaments to study. 2. Operate printers with defined filaments in a specialized exposure chamber. 3. Measure particle and VOC emissions. 4. Model VOC emissions for exposure levels in defined building environments. And 5. Conduct particle toxicity analysis. To conduct this research, Chemical Insights engaged academic partners with expertise on particle and chemical characterization, health assessment for particles, and chemical exposure. Together, this group of scientific stakeholders and technology experts finalized the test program to characterize particle and chemical emissions and their impact on indoor air quality and human health. To conduct this research, a chamber study and various measuring methods were used. Let's take a look at these more in depth. The methodology for characterizing and quantifying 3D printer emissions involved operating the printer inside a controlled environmental exposure chamber. 3D printers with various print filament materials were operated in a well-mixed stainless steel emission exposure chamber. This chamber was continuously supplied with clean air, operated at standard environmental conditions, and a typical air exchange rate of 1 per hour. Airborne particle concentrations were measured online by particle analyzers. Their chemical composition is measured by both online and offline analytical instruments. VOCs were collected on absorbance and measured by analytical instruments offline. Particle dynamics was studied using an aerosol model. Particle toxicity analyses were done on particles collected on filters via different assessing methods. VOC exposure levels were predicted using indoor air models. A log-normal moment aerosol dynamic model was used to study the particle dynamic processes during printing. This model, combined with observation data from the chamber, allowed researchers to understand how particles are formed and behave during printing, what conditions impact those processes, and possible mitigation methods. This model assumes particle size follows log-normal distribution. Investigated processes included new particle formation, particle growth by condensation, and coagulation. These were included in the governing equations. The key parameters of particle distributions, including total concentration, mean size, and deviation, were calculated by solving governing equations using the method of moments. Based on the results of the chamber study, researchers modeled the potential exposure levels that users and building occupants may receive when 3D printers are operating. These exposure levels can be evaluated for chronic and acute health hazards. These scenarios simulated the emission concentrations from 3D printing in a single-family residence room, or within about 0.5 meters near the printer. Personal exposure levels for people close to an operating printer are greater than exposure levels for people further away. The next phase of this research will continue to study particle and chemical emissions from 3D printing. Researchers will apply the established method to other commonly applied 3D printing technologies, analyze additional filaments that contain metals, flame retardants, and other species that may present a health concern, and investigate how 3D printing in real room settings affect indoor air quality. The research is also valuable to manufacturers of 3D printers and filament. The findings that detail when and how in the printing process emissions are generated can help drive improvements for future 3D printer and filament design. Specifically, a possible mitigation strategy revealed by the research was to remove the newly formed small particles near the extruder nozzle by thermophoresis. As manufacturers increasingly test and evaluate their printers' emissions, this, along with future research, will help the industry move towards a safer future together. To learn more, visit chemicalinsights.org.